The morning light stretched across the prairie like a golden blanket, brushing over the rolling hills and sparkling on dew-laden grass. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and wildflowers, and the distant horizon shimmered with soft shades of pink and lavender. A lone cowboy rode slowly along the dirt path that wound through the vast expanse, his horse's hooves sinking slightly into the soft earth. The prairie, quiet and serene, was a world of open skies and endless possibilities, but that morning it held a sight that would forever change the cowboy's life. As he rounded a small rise, his eyes caught movement in the shadow of a shallow depression between two hills. At first he thought it was a trick of the lightsome curled-up animals, perhaps, but as he drew closer, his heart tightened. Two tiny children were lying side by side on the cold, dew-soaked ground. Their small bodies were bundled together, shivering violently. Their clothes were ragged and dirty, hardly enough to shield them from the chill of the morning. Their faces were streaked with tears and grime, and their eyes, when they opened briefly, held a mixture of confusion, fear, and exhaustion. The cowboy's instincts kicked in. He dismounted quietly, taking slow, deliberate steps so as not to startle them. He noticed the way they huddled together, their tiny hands clutching each other as if the bond between them was the only thing keeping them alive. Kneeling down a few feet away, he spoke softly, in a voice that was calm and steady. "Hey there. It's okay. You're safe now." The children stirred, their eyes wide and wary. One of them whimpered softly, the sound almost lost in the vast openness of the prairie. Without hesitation, the cowboy reached out gently and scooped the twins into his arms, holding them against his chest. He felt their small, trembling bodies pressed to him, their fingers gripping his coat tightly. "Where's Mama?" he asked, though he knew they might not answer. His heart ached at their silence. He wrapped them in his long coat, drawing them close to share his warmth. Their little bodies gradually stopped shivering as the warmth of his chest and the shelter of his coat gave them a sense of safety for the first time in what must have been days. Around him, the prairie was quiet again, but the signs of struggle were evident. The ground near the children was trampled and flattened. Footprints led off in different directions, and a torn piece of blanket lay discarded nearby. It was clear they had wandered or perhaps had been abandoned, and somehow survived alone in this harsh landscape. The cowboy's mind raced with questions. How had these fragile little humans survived the night on their own? Who could have left them here, and why? Most importantly, where was their mother? Despite years of living a solitary life on the ranch, the sight of the twins' vulnerability stirred something deep in him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew he couldn't leave them there. They needed warmth, food, and safety. Hoisting them more securely in his arms, he mounted his horse and began the ride back to his ranch. As the wind whipped across the prairie, the children nestled closer, their heads resting against his chest, and for the first time in days, they seemed to trust someone. The cowboy whispered softly, "Don't worry. You're safe now. I'll take care of you." The twins blinked up at him, their tiny faces still streaked with dirt, but their wide eyes reflected a flicker of hope. In that moment, beneath the vast prairie sky, a bond was forming, one that would grow stronger with every passing day and ultimately change all their lives forever. The cowboy carried the twins carefully across the prairie, his long coat wrapped tightly around their small, shivering bodies. Each step he took stirred up the morning dew, leaving tiny droplets on his boots, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the two fragile children in his arms, who clung to each other as if they were the only anchors in a world that had been unkind to them. Their small fingers clutched his coat, and their eyes, wide and uncertain, darted around, taking in the vast, unfamiliar landscape. "Don't be afraid," he murmured gently, his voice low and soothing. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe with me now." The twins, hearing the warmth in his tone, blinked at him, their lips trembling. One of them, the slightly older of the two, let out a small hiccuping sob, which made the cowboy pause and gently press his cheek against the child's head. There was no need to rush them. The children had survived so long on their own that patience would be the bridge to trust. He adjusted his hold, making sure both were secure and warm, and began to speak softly to them. "You must be hungry," he said. "Don't worry. We'll have something to eat soon." The words seemed to calm them slightly. They nestled closer, tiny heads tucked into the folds of his coat, seeking comfort in his presence. Their shivering slowed, though their eyes still darted nervously over the wide-open prairie, as if expecting danger to leap from the grasses at any moment. As they walked, the cowboy scanned the landscape for any signs of their mother or anyone else who might have left them. There were no tracks that clearly led to a home, only vague indentations in the grass, hinting at hurried movement and perhaps a struggle. A small torn doll lay near a tree stump they had passed, its stuffing spilling out, a silent testament to the chaos they had endured. The cowboy's heart clenched at the thought of what these children had gone through. He had faced harsh winters, raging storms, and treacherous terrain in his life, but nothing had ever affected him the way seeing these tiny humans, alone and afraid, did. After what felt like hours to the children, though it had only been a short ride, they arrived at the edge of his ranch. The familiar sight of the wooden fence and the small farmhouse seemed to reassure them in some instinctive way. The cowboy gently laid the twins down near a haystack, crouching so he was at their level. "We'll get you warm," he promised, his hands brushing the hair from their faces. "No one's going to hurt you here." He fetched a thick woolen blanket from the nearby barn and wrapped it around them, creating a little cocoon of warmth. He then set about making a small fire in the hearth of the barn, knowing that warmth and comfort would be as crucial as food and water. The twins watched silently, their little bodies relaxing gradually as the heat reached them. The cowboy prepared a simple meal bread, warm milk, and a few fruits he had on hand. He offered it to them gently, and they ate slowly, trusting him more with every bite. As they ate, the cowboy continued to speak softly, telling them small, comforting stories about the ranch, the animals, and the prairie itself. His calm presence, combined with the steady rhythm of his voice, worked like a balm on their frayed nerves. Slowly, the twins began to respond. Soft giggles escaped. Tiny hands reached for his in acknowledgement, and the earlier tension in their bodies eased. By the end of the day, the children had started to relax, feeling, for the first time in a long while, that they were safe. Then the prairie stretched endlessly, the golden morning light casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Though the twins had survived alone here, the cowboy knew instinctively that they could not remain in this vast, unpredictable landscape. The cold, the wildlife, the unpredictable weather, all of it posed dangers that no child should face. He adjusted the twins in his arms, feeling their tiny bodies pressing against him as he climbed onto his horse. Their trust in him, though fragile, was already beginning to grow. The ride back to his ranch would be their first step toward safety, warmth, and a sense of home. The twins were quiet at first, their small hands gripping his coat tightly. The older one peeked out from under the folds of his coat, eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "It's okay," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the child's damp hair. "I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you now." The younger twin nuzzled closer, letting out a soft sigh that sounded like relief. The cowboy could feel the tension in their little bodies slowly easing, their trust beginning to take root. As they rode, he kept scanning the prairie. The remnants of their ordeal were everywhere, a torn piece of cloth caught on a bush, flattened patches of grass where they had tried to rest, and the faint footprints that led him here in the first place. He wondered how long the twins had wandered alone, and his heart ached at the thought of their hunger, cold, and fear. Yet, seeing them now, secure in his arms, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this day would mark a new beginning, not just for them, but for all of them together. The journey back was slow. He needed to keep a steady pace so as not to jostle the twins too much. Occasionally, one would murmur softly, a word or two barely audible, and he would respond with gentle reassurance. "I hear you," he said once when the older twin whispered something that sounded like Mama. "We'll find her, I promise. But right now, let's get you warm and fed." The younger twin shifted slightly, resting a tiny head against his shoulder, and the cowboy could feel the trust building between them. When the ranch finally came into view, a modest wooden farmhouse surrounded by fields, fences, and grazing animals, the twins' eyes widened. The familiar structures, which were mundane to the cowboy, seemed almost magical to them, a place of safety they had never known. He guided the horse carefully through the gates, aware that the children were absorbing every detail, the sound of chickens clucking, the rustle of the hay in the barn, the scent of animals and earth mixed with smoke from the fireplace. This world was entirely new to them, yet here they would begin to feel secure. Inside the barn, he carefully set the twins down on a stack of soft hay, still wrapped in his coat. They looked around, hesitant but curious, eyes darting from corner to corner. He smiled softly and knelt beside them, brushing stray strands of hair from their faces. "You're safe here," he said, his voice firm but kind. "No one's going to hurt you. We're going to make sure you're warm. We'll have something to eat. And you can rest." The twins didn't respond with words, only small nods and wide eyes that reflected their cautious trust. The cowboy then set about preparing their first meal in days, warm milk and bread, simple but nourishing. He carefully handed it to them, watching as their little hands accepted it. The older twin took tentative bites, while the younger one nibbled slowly, still wary but reassured by the cowboy's steady presence. As they ate, he hummed softly, a tune that drifted through the barn like a comforting promise. By the time the meal was finished, the children's tension had eased, replaced by the beginnings of comfort and trust. That night, he built a small fire in the corner of the barn, the warmth casting dancing shadows over the hay where the twins lay. Wrapped in blankets and nestled against each other, they finally began to sleep, their tiny bodies relaxed for the first time in what must have been days. The cowboy watched over them quietly, sitting close enough to respond instantly if they stirred. He realized that this simple act, providing warmth, shelter, and safety, was the first step in a long journey. A journey not just to reunite them with their mother, if possible, but to help these little souls heal. In the stillness of the prairie night, he made a silent promise. No matter what it took, he would protect them. The prairies stretched endlessly, the golden morning light casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Though the twins had survived alone here, the cowboy knew instinctively that they could not remain in this vast, unpredictable landscape. The cold, the wildlife, the unpredictable weather, all of it posed dangers that no child should face. He adjusted the twins in his arms, feeling their tiny bodies pressing against him as he climbed onto his horse. Their trust in him, though fragile, was already beginning to grow. The ride back to his ranch would be their first step toward safety, warmth, and a sense of home. The twins were quiet at first, their small hands gripping his coat tightly. The older one peeked out from under the folds of his coat, eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "It's okay," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the child's damp hair. "I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you now." The younger twin nuzzled closer, letting out a soft sigh that sounded like relief. The cowboy could feel the tension in their little bodies slowly easing. Their trust beginning to take root. As they rode, he kept scanning the prairie. The remnants of their ordeal were everywhere, a torn piece of cloth caught on a bush, flattened patches of grass where they had tried to rest, and the faint footprints that led him here in the first place. He wondered how long the twins had wandered alone, and his heart ached at the thought of their hunger, cold, and fear. Yet, seeing them now, secure in his arms, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this day would mark a new beginning, not just for them, but for all of them together. The journey back was slow. He needed to keep a steady pace so as not to jostle the twins too much. Occasionally, one would murmur softly, a word or two barely audible, and he would respond with gentle reassurance. "I hear you," he said once when the older twin whispered something that sounded like Mama. "We'll find her, I promise. But right now, let's get you warm and fed." The younger twin shifted slightly, resting a tiny head against his shoulder, and the cowboy could feel the trust building between them. When the ranch finally came into view, a modest wooden farmhouse surrounded by fields, fences, and grazing animals, the twins' eyes widened. The familiar structures, which were mundane to the cowboy, seemed almost magical to them, a place of safety they had never known. He guided the horse carefully through the gates, aware that the children were absorbing every detail, the sound of chickens clucking, the rustle of the hay in the barn, the scent of animals and earth mixed with smoke from the fireplace. This world was entirely new to them, yet here they would begin to feel secure. Inside the barn, he carefully set the twins down on a stack of soft hay, still wrapped in his coat. They looked around, hesitant but curious, eyes darting from corner to corner. He smiled softly and knelt beside them, brushing stray strands of hair from their faces. The sun had dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, when the cowboy finally settled the twins into the small, cozy barn at his ranch. The day had been long and filled with uncertainty, but now, as twilight crept across the prairie, there was a sense of quiet safety in the air. The twins, exhausted from the ordeal of wandering alone and the emotional shock of being rescued, huddled together on a makeshift bed of hay, wrapped in thick blankets. Their tiny bodies were finally beginning to relax, their chests rising and falling with a slower, steadier rhythm. Signaling the first signs of comfort in days, the cowboy moved quietly, careful not to startle them. He had prepared a small fire in the corner of the barn, its warm glow flickering against the wooden walls, casting long, dancing shadows. The crackle of the flames was soothing, and the twins' eyes, previously wide with fear, now softened as they watched the flickering light. He knelt down, adjusting the blankets around them to ensure they were warm and snug, then whispered, "You're safe here. Nothing's going to hurt you tonight." The words seemed to sink in, the children's tense little hands relaxing as they leaned, slightly against each other, though they were too young to fully understand. The twins responded to his presence instinctively. One of them reached out a tiny hand and touched his arm lightly, a tentative gesture of trust. The cowboy smiled softly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. These children were completely dependent on him, and he was determined to honor that trust. He retrieved a small tin of warm milk he had brought along and gently offered it to them. The older twin sipped cautiously at first, then a little more eagerly, while the younger one clung to his arm, still wary but curious. Even these small acts, eating, drinking, breathing in safety, were victories in themselves. As the light from the fire cast a comforting glow across the barn, the cowboy began speaking softly, telling stories of the ranch, of the animals that lived there, and of the wide open prairie. His voice was low and rhythmic, a soothing hum that blended with the crackle of the fire. The twins listened, their eyes half closed, absorbing not just the words but the calm, steady presence of someone who cared deeply for them. They had been adrift in the world, with no one to provide comfort or guidance, and this simple act of storytelling, of being seen, heard, and protected was a balm to their tiny, wounded spirits. Outside, the prairie night deepened. The wind rustled through the tall grasses, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and distant wildflowers. The cowboy kept a watchful eye on the children, noticing the way their little bodies finally began to relax fully, curling together for warmth. He understood that this night was more than just the first night at the ranch. It was the first night of safety, the first night of hope, and perhaps the first night of healing. Eventually, the twins drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, their tiny breaths steady, their faces softened by the warmth and security surrounding them. The cowboy sat nearby, his back against the wooden wall, keeping vigil. He allowed himself a quiet moment to reflect on the day's events, how fragile life could be, how easily innocence could be lost, and yet how resilient the human spirit was even in the smallest of bodies. In that still, starlit night, he made a silent promise to himself and to the twins. No matter what dangers lay ahead, no matter the obstacles or the unknowns, he would protect them. He would give them warmth, food, safety, and care until they could stand on their own, or until he could reunite them with the mother they so desperately needed. For now, though, he allowed himself a quiet satisfaction. The twins were safe, the barn was warm, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the prairie seemed less lonely, less harsh, and a little more like home. The morning sun filtered gently through the wooden slats of the barn, casting stripes of light across the hay where the twins had slept. Their breathing was steady now, calm and untroubled, a stark contrast to the shivering, fearful children the cowboy had found just days before. The warmth of the barn, combined with a good night's rest and the safety of his presence, had begun to work its quiet magic. He knelt beside them, brushing a stray lock of hair from one child's face, and spoke softly, "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" The twins blinked sleepily, their small faces illuminated by curiosity and trust. They were beginning to relax in a way that signaled they were ready to communicate, albeit in their tentative, childlike way. The cowboy knew that patience was key. These little ones had been through trauma, cold, hunger, fear, and separation from their mother. Their story would not be easy to unravel, and he needed to coax it gently. Without rushing or frightening them, he began by offering them breakfast, warm milk, bread, and a few slices of fruit. As they ate slowly, he asked small, simple questions, carefully observing their reactions and gestures. One of the twins pointed toward the distant hills, then to themselves, indicating a sense of direction and origin. They muttered a few disjointed words, "Mama," "fire," "run," and the cowboy's heart tightened. He could piece together fragments: a fire, sudden displacement, fear, and the absence of their mother. It was clear they had survived on their own for an extended period, wandering the prairie and relying solely on each other. After breakfast, he moved closer and spoke in soothing tones, encouraging them to tell him more. He drew sketches in the dirt of the barn floor, using simple symbols to represent home, fire, and family, trying to bridge the gap between their limited vocabulary and the story he needed to understand. The twins responded eagerly, pointing to drawings and making small gestures, their tiny hands tracing the symbols with concentration. Gradually, a picture emerged. Their home had been destroyed by fire, forcing them into the wilderness, alone and frightened. Their mother had been separated from them during the chaos, and though they had wandered, hoping to find her, they had become lost. The cowboy listened intently, nodding and offering quiet words of reassurance. Each fragment they revealed was precious, and he recorded it carefully in his mind. The twins' resilience amazed him, their courage in surviving the cold nights. The hunger and the isolation was extraordinary for children so small. Yet, despite their strength, the longing for their mother was palpable, reflected in the wide, tear-filled eyes and the gentle clinging to each other as they recounted the story. By late morning, a pattern began to emerge in the twins' gestures and speech. They could indicate where the fire had occurred, which direction they had wandered, and what they remembered of their mother's appearance and voice. The cowboy realized that these details, while incomplete, might help him track her down. But more than that, he understood that his role had shifted. He was no longer simply a rescuer or observer. He had become a guardian, someone who could provide stability, comfort, and protection as they navigated the uncertainty of their fractured lives. Sitting on the hay, the cowboy gently held both twins on his lap, feeling their warmth and the soft rhythm of their breathing. He whispered, "We'll find Mama, I promise. But for now, you're safe. You're not alone anymore." The twins, in their quiet way, responded with small smiles, a tentative hope beginning to shine in their eyes. Their story was still unfolding, the truth only partially revealed, but in that moment, a bond was cemented, a bond of trust, care, and mutual dependence. The day stretched on, filled with soft words, gentle guidance, and small acts of comfort. The cowboy understood that unraveling their story would take time, patience, and empathy. But for the first time since their ordeal began, the twins were not just surviving, they were beginning to heal, their hearts slowly opening to the possibility of safety, love, and reunion. And the cowboy, for his part, knew that he would walk every step of that journey with them, no matter how long or days passed on the ranch, each one bringing subtle changes in the twins and in the cowboy himself. What had begun as wary caution on their part was slowly transforming into trust, and with trust came the fragile beginnings of a bond that neither the children nor the cowboy had expected. The twins, once shivering masses of fear and exhaustion, were now slowly exploring the safe space of the barn, testing boundaries and discovering the warmth, safety, and care that had been missing from their lives. The cowboy observed them closely, learning their rhythms, their preferences, and their personalities. One of the twins, slightly older, was inquisitive, asking questions with tiny gestures, pointing at objects and mimicking sounds he made. The younger twin was quieter, more cautious, but equally responsive to gentle words and tender gestures. The cowboy found himself adapting, his life adjusting around the needs of these two small humans. Feeding schedules, playtime, and rest periods became carefully considered routines. He was no longer alone on the prairie. These children had claimed a permanent place in his life. The bond grew strongest during the quiet, intimate moments. At dawn, when the prairie was still and the air smelled of dew and wildflowers, he would carry the twins out to see the sunrise. They would point at the shifting colors in the sky, giggling at the brightness and the shadows, and he would explain the world around them in simple, comforting words. At mealtime, he encouraged them to help, letting the older twin hold a small pan or stir milk, and laughing softly as spills inevitably happened. The twins began to respond to his humor, their first smiles of pure joy lighting up their small faces. Evenings were perhaps the most significant. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the prairie in gold and lavender, he would read stories or hum songs, their little hands occasionally reaching out to touch his. The twins began to anticipate these routines, climbing into his lap without hesitation, leaning against him as he read tales of the prairie, animals, and distant lands. With each story, each gentle word, the bond deepened, forming a layer of trust that could withstand fear and hardship. The cowboy also noticed small, almost imperceptible changes in himself. His once solitary heart, accustomed to the vast emptiness of the prairie, began to fill with a warmth he hadn't expected. He found joy in their laughter, in the way their eyes brightened at small discoveries, and in the trust they placed in him without reservation. Even in his moments of solitude, he thought of them, planning ways to keep them safe, happy, and nurtured. Play became a crucial part of their connection. He made small toys from scraps of wood and cloth, teaching them to balance on low beams and to mimic the movements of the animals on the ranch. The twins responded eagerly, their laughter echoing across the barnyard, filling the once quiet spaces with life. Sometimes, when the older twin fell or the younger one cried from fear, he would scoop them both into his arms, soothing them with a strength and gentleness that became a comfort they came to rely on. By the end of the week, the bond was undeniable. The twins began to call him Papa in their own small voices, their trust and affection emerging naturally, without coercion or pressure. They followed him through the barn and yard, held his hand when they crossed uneven ground, and leaned against him when they were tired or scared. He, in turn, had become more than a caretaker. He was a protector, a teacher, and a constant source of stability. It was in these quiet, everyday moments, feeding, playing, reading, and watching over them, that the cowboy realized the depth of the connection they had formed. The bond was not born of obligation but of love, trust, and mutual dependence. The twins had found safety and affection, and in return, he had discovered a purpose that went beyond the ranch or the prairie. In the midst of hardship and uncertainty, they had created a family, a small, fragile, but deeply real connection that would shape all their lives. The days on the ranch settled into a rhythm. But the cowboy knew that comfort alone would not complete the story. The twins' mother was still missing, and the emptiness in their small hearts was a silent reminder that their family was not whole. One crisp morning, as the twins played near the barn with their makeshift toys, the cowboy made a decision. He would search beyond the safety of his ranch, beyond the rolling hills of the prairie, to find the woman who had brought these children into the world. It would be a journey fraught with uncertainty and danger, but he could not ignore the silent plea in their eyes, the unspoken question of where their mother was. He packed supplies carefully, dried food, a water canteen, a warm blanket, and a notebook to record any clues he might find along the way. The twins, aware of his intentions though too young to fully grasp the journey, clung to him, their small hands brushing his arms in quiet encouragement. He promised them gently, "I'll find Mama, I swear it. You stay safe here, and I'll bring her back." Though he had made similar promises to himself before, this one felt weightier, heavier with responsibility, and filled with the hope of reunion. The search began with the clues the twins had offered, their gestures and broken words pointing to the general direction of nearby towns and settlements. The cowboy traveled steadily, stopping in small villages, asking questions of innkeepers, shopkeepers, and anyone who might have seen a woman matching their description. Some leads were promising, others frustrating dead ends. Whispers of a fire, rumors of a woman moving hurriedly with 2 children, and sightings of a young mother wandering near. The outskirts of towns formed a patchwork trail of half-truths and vague directions. With each new clue, he felt the twins' presence in his mind, their small voices urging him forward. Nights were often spent under the stars, the prairie stretching endlessly around him, but he would imagine them safe in his barn, tucked under blankets, waiting for him to return. The thought of their tiny, trusting faces propelled him through exhaustion, hunger, and uncertainty. He had grown used to solitude, but the purpose of this quest added a fire to his resolve he had never known. Days turned into weeks, and the cowboy began to piece together a pattern. Each sighting, each rumor, brought him closer to understanding what had happened during the chaos that separated mother and children. The fire had not been accidental. It seemed deliberate, a cruel act that had scattered the family. He followed every lead meticulously, interviewing witnesses, tracking the remnants of footprints, and noting every small detail that might reveal her location. Along the way, he encountered obstacles. Roads were treacherous, weather unpredictable, and not all townsfolk were helpful. Some regarded him with suspicion. A lone cowboy asking questions about a missing woman and 2 children could easily be misjudged. But he persisted, using a calm demeanor and steady presence to earn trust, slowly gathering fragments of information. Each small clue was celebrated quietly, as if even a hint of progress was a victory. Back at the ranch, the twins' memory anchored him. He thought of their laughter echoing across the barn, of their tiny hands reaching for him, and of the trust they had placed in his care. This was not merely a mission to locate a woman. It was a journey to restore hope and wholeness to lives that had been fractured. Every step, every mile, every conversation was infused with purpose. As the trail grew more tangible, the cowboy realized the enormity of what lay ahead. The mother was out there, somewhere, in need of help, and the reunion would not be simple. Danger, misfortune, or those responsible for her disappearance could still block the path. But with determination stealing his heart, he knew he would not rest until the family he had come. The cowboy had been following the trail for days, his boots dusty and his spirit tested by uncertainty, yet every small clue pushed him forward. He had traced whispers and fragments of memory accounts from townsfolk, fleeting sightings of a woman, even the faint smell of smoke in the air that reminded him of the fire that had separated the family. The prairie stretched endlessly around him, indifferent to human suffering, yet he moved with a single-minded determination. The twins' faces were always with him in his mind, their trust, their tiny hands, their questions about their mother. It was late afternoon when he reached a narrow canyon flanked by jagged rocks. His horse slowed, sensing tension in the air, and the cowboy dismounted, scanning carefully. Here, he discovered signs that someone had been hiding an overturned cart, a pile of scattered belongings, a makeshift camp shielded from the open sky. His heart quickened. The signs matched the fragments of information he had collected. Could it be that the mother was here, trapped, unable to leave? He moved cautiously, every step measured, eyes alert for any danger. As he approached, he noticed a shadowy figure at the edge of the camp, bound by ropes and guarded by 2 rough-looking men. The woman's face was pale but familiar, the same face that the twins had sketched with trembling hands in the dirt back at the barn. Relief surged through him, quickly followed by anger at the injustice she had endured. He realized that the fire that had scattered the family had not been an accident. Someone had deliberately separated them, and now the mother was being held against her will. The cowboy weighed his options. There was no time to waste, yet caution was critical. With the wind at his back, he approached stealthily, assessing the guards and the terrain. His knowledge of the land, honed over years on the prairie, gave him confidence. Every small advantage mattered. He waited for the moment when the men's attention wavered, then acted. In a swift motion, he created a distraction by tossing a rock, drawing the men away just long enough to free the mother from her bindings. The reunion was heart-stopping in its intensity. The mother fell into his arms, sobbing with relief and disbelief. Her eyes, brimming with tears, found the cowboy's, and for the first time in months she felt hope. "My children," she whispered, voice trembling. The cowboy nodded, reassuring her. "They're safe. I've got them. We'll bring them back to you." Her gratitude was palpable, but the danger was not yet over. The men guarding her soon realized what had happened, shouting and moving to pursue. The cowboy, mother in tow, moved with calculated precision, guiding her along hidden paths and narrow ledges known only to someone who knew the prairie intimately. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, the cowboy's thoughts drifted to the twins. He imagined their tiny faces lighting up at the sight of their mother, the tears and laughter, the embrace that would finally make them whole again. This vision fueled his strength, and he pressed forward, undeterred by exhaustion or fear. Every step was a step toward hope, every careful maneuver a step toward family restored. Finally, After what felt like hours but was mere moments in the grand scheme of the day, the immediate danger passed. The mother and the cowboy paused atop a small rise overlooking the prairie. She clutched his arm, gratitude and awe written across her face. "I never thought I'd see them again," she said softly, voice breaking. The cowboy's eyes, usually steady and unflinching, softened. "You will, soon," I promised. That promise carried weight, not just a vow, but a culmination of every step, every risk, every sleepless night. The twist of fate that had led the cowboy to this place, to this moment, was unpredictable, yet somehow perfect. Without him, the family might have remained separated forever. And now, with the mother freed and alive, the path forward to the ranch, to safety, to reunion was finally open. The cowboy exhaled slowly, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and quiet triumph washing over him. The family, fractured and scattered by tragedy, was on the cusp of being made whole again. But more than that, the bond forged between him and the twins, and now the mother, would never be broken. A testament to resilience, courage, and the unexpected twists of fate that sometimes guide lives toward hope. The ride back to the ranch was a mixture of relief, anticipation, and quiet joy. The mother rode beside the cowboy on a borrowed horse, her hands gripping the reins tightly as she glanced repeatedly at the sprawling prairie, half expecting danger to appear at any moment. The cowboy walked his horse alongside hers, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert but calm. The twins were already waiting, perched atop the haystack in the barnyard, their small faces pressed together as they squinted into the distance, looking for the familiar figure who had promised them safety. When the mother came into view, the twins erupted in squeals of recognition, their tiny legs carrying them as fast as they could across the soft earth. They collided with her in a tangle of arms, tears, and laughter, their voices rising in a chorus of joy and relief. The mother dropped to her knees, enveloping them in an embrace that seemed to hold every ounce of her fear, worry, and love all at once. Her tears mingled with theirs, a cleansing torrent that washed away weeks of uncertainty and sorrow. The cowboy watched quietly, a small smile tugging at his lips, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had not realized he was capable of. He stepped closer, and the mother looked up at him, gratitude and awe shining in her eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head, brushing it off with a humble shrug. "No thanks needed. Keeping them safe, that's all that mattered." The twins, sensing the bond he shared with them, reached for his hands, tugging him gently into the circle of their newfound family. He knelt down and held them close, letting their tiny hands brush against his arms. For the first time, the cowboy felt the true meaning of family, not just the bonds of blood, but the connection forged through trust, protection, and unwavering care. Over the next few days, life at the ranch settled into a gentle rhythm, but it was now filled with laughter, warmth, and purpose. The mother shared stories of her own survival, and together with the cowboy, they tended to the twins' needs, teaching them, comforting them, and allowing them to rediscover a sense of stability. The children began to sleep soundly through the night, no longer haunted by fear or cold. Their eyes, once wide with worry, now sparkled with curiosity and joy. The ranch itself, once a quiet and solitary place, became a haven for this small family. The cowboy taught the mother some of the skills she had missed during her time apart from the twins, how to tend to the animals, manage the fields, and navigate the vast prairie safely. They laughed together as the children attempted to mimic his careful handling of horses and chores, their small hands clumsy but eager to help. The bonds of trust that had formed between the cowboy and the twins now extended to their mother, creating a resilient, interconnected family unit. Evenings were the most magical. The family would sit together near the fire, sharing stories, sipping warm milk, and watching the stars emerge over the prairie. The cowboy often found himself reflecting on the twists of fate that had brought them together. The cold morning when he first found the twins, the clues pieced together over days of careful searching, the danger and uncertainty that had tested every ounce of his resolve. Each challenge had strengthened the bond between them, creating a sense of security and love that was rare and precious. In quiet moments, the mother would place a hand on the cowboy's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken promise he had kept, the promise to protect, to guide, and to love the children as if they were his own. The twins, nestled between them, looked up with wide, trusting eyes, their laughter echoing across the barnyard. The cowboy realized that he had found more than just the fulfillment of a duty. He had found a purpose, a family, and a home. Under the vast prairie sky, with the wind carrying the scents of earth, wildflowers, and fresh hay, the family sat together, whole at last. The trauma and separation of the past weeks were replaced by hope, love, and the promise of many mornings filled with warmth, laughter, and safety. The cowboy looked out over the fields, then down at the smiling faces of the twins and their mother, and he knew that life, unpredictable and challenging as it could be,